Hi.
Hi, Candy. How are you?
I'm okay. Just a little under the weather. This cold. Thank God it's a cold, not anything else. I'm
No,
trying not to let it escalate for too long, you know?
I
So I
know.
hope I can last the whole evening, you know. Hey Stephanie, how you doing?
Well, Happy New Year to everyone.
Happy New Year to you too.
Hi, Jeremiah. Jeremiah? I see you, but you're still on mute. I mean, if you can hear me, you only need one more person for quorum, and then you can start the meeting when you're ready. Jeremiah, if you can hear me, you have quorum.
Hey, Marlene.
Hi. I'm not sure if you heard me. Did you hear me?
Oh, let me see.
You have a quorum.
All right, sorry, I had my volume on.
It's okay. I figured that because I saw that you were on. I'm like, I think something's up with his computer.
Yes. Sorry, okay, so how are we doing? Sorry.
You're fine. You're absolutely fine. Whenever you're ready, you have a quorum, so you can meet again.
Perfect. All right, so it's 6:35, 6:36 p.m. now. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone this evening. For anyone who may not know me, I'm Jeremiah Schlotman. I'm the chair of the Housing Committee of Community Board 11. So I'll just have Marlene go over first have some opening remarks, and then we'll get to the adoption of the agenda and get underway.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Manhattan Community Board 11's Housing Committee meeting, and Happy New Year to everyone. Just a few housekeeping things. Until further notice, all meetings at Manhattan Community Board 11 will be conducted by video conference. Links to register to attend the video conferences for each of our respective committee meetings will be published on the meetings calendar on our website. For those of you calling in, it is www.cb11m.org. To avoid crosstalk and help the meeting run effectively, panelists and attendees are asked to keep their microphones on mute when they are not speaking. It is also helpful to utilize headphones. Those participating by phone can dial *6 to unmute. That is also how you mute your line. If you wish to share a question or comment, you may do so by utilizing the raise hands function. Our staff, myself, will monitor to ensure that hands are recognized in turn. Those participating by phone can dial *9 to raise their hand. Committee members will be called on first, then attendees. Please keep your questions or comments brief. Jeremiah, I'll hand it back over to you now.
All right, thanks, Marlene.
You're welcome.
So do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved by Xavier.
Seconded by Robert.
Okay, so I'll just do a voice vote if that's okay. So all in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thank you. Any opposed? Abstentions? All right, the motion passes. All right, moving right on. So do I have any announcements from any committee members? All right, I don't see any hands. You can always let me know, Marlene, if I miss anything too. So with that, I'll open it up to any members of the public who are here. Does anyone have any announcements that they would like to share with the committee? Yes, Nye. How you doing, Nye? Go right on ahead.
Hey guys, how are you? Happy New Year. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you perfectly.
Great. Just wanted to share that in honor of the National Day of Service, which is a celebration of both the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King and the new administration that is coming in, there will be a day of action around COVID in relation to the Housing Committee. That day of action will be around, of course, residents of NYCHA with free mass distributions across the city and mobile testing sites. If anybody has any questions, they're welcome to email me, naiwhitakerinc@gmail.com. But both DOHMH, which is the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, the Test and Trace team, the vaccination team, as well as several groups across the 5 boroughs are all coming together in partnership to make sure that our neighbors have access to masks and information to stay healthy and safe, and also are updated about the future plans for vaccination distribution in public housing. So again, Nye Whitaker, my email is naiwhitakerinc@gmail.com. It is also listed on the President's National Day of Service website, and I'm going to drop that link into the chat as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nye. All right, do I have any other announcements? All right, no announcements. So we'll move on. Any informational updates from the committee members before we go to a brief informational update that's on the agenda listed there? Okay, anyone from the public? Any informational updates? Okay, so anyone can chime in as well. Feel free to raise your hand if there's anything that you want to add to this, but we have on the agenda the COVID-19 rent relief package, housing provisions. I will say that for one, in New York State, there was a period where there was some rental assistance program. I think it was $100 million that was established to help subsidize tenants who had faced financial hardship during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so there would be a one-time subsidy from the government administered by DHCR that would not have to be paid back by tenants. And but they were not first come, first served. They're evaluated on those, and those that the agency determines are the most in need will be have those that subsidy paid to them. But that process had closed in the summer, but there's a new application period that is presently open. It opened on December 18th, and it's to remain open according to the New York State website through Monday, February 1st, 2021. So folks must be a renter and have a primary residence in New York State to apply. Applicants must have lost income during the period of April 1st, 2020 to July 31st, 2020. And before March 7th, 2020, household income must have been at or below 80% of the area median income, or AMI, adjusted for household size. And households must be rent burdened during the months they're applying for rent assistance during April 1st, 2020 to July 31st, 2020. So those are criteria that you can find on the state HCR website as well. So those, again, applications are open. If you're a tenant who's represented by counsel in an eviction proceeding of any sort of non-payment in particular, you may have already heard of this, and if not, then it's another avenue that should be explored by you, and you should run it by your attorney to see if it's something viable in your specific situation as well. And I know that, you know, there, of course, things can be subject to hopefully increased assistance over time. A lot of things have been piecemeal and you know, implemented sort of as we come up against deadlines, right? With moratoria on evictions, for example, you know, another expected wave of evictions. So now there's more funding. So this latest round of stimulus, for example, the $900 billion that was passed by Congress, which is less than half of what the CARES Act had. But that included, I believe, $25 billion for assistance for rental subsidies to states and local municipalities to administer to help for these types of programs that HCR, New York State Homes and Community Renewal has. to offer for tenants. So, I also wanted to note that the federal eviction moratorium has been extended through January 31st, 2021. And then I think it also extends the foreclosure prevention through February 28th, 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And then finally, I'll get into it later since it's later on in the agenda. I'll just stay on focus here, but I will note that New York State has stronger eviction moratorium provisions that were just recently passed, just after, a few days after the latest stimulus package that was passed by Congress in late December. So does anyone else have anything that they would like to add to that discussion? Whether you're in the committee or in the public. And thank you, Nye. I just want to draw attention again to the chat. That was what Nye Whitaker shared in her announcement section. She dropped the information into the chat. So feel free to speak up if for some reason you don't have access to the chat, but it should be there for you. All right, I'll move on if no one has anything. Like I said, we will still be digging into these topics a little bit here, just to reassess where we're at. Brief overview at the turn of 2021. So I'll move on and we'll get to Wilfredo Lopez. So he's the legislative director for Council Member Kalos. I appreciate you being here tonight and look forward to hearing from you. I know as a committee, we had discussed with the staff and committee members and also members of the public that we thought it would be a good idea to bring some local electeds in, those who represent us, and see where our electeds stand on some of these issues. There were some questions and it did get pretty robustly debated at points last committee meeting. And of course, I'm referring to the provision, the New York City Council provision, law that would prohibit criminal background checks for the screening of potential tenants. So that was that's it in a nutshell. And of course, you'll remember if you were here last month that we did discuss it, and again, that there were some strong opinions on it. And we wanted to reach out to our electeds and just see what they thought. I do think, if I'm not mistaken, along with Councilmember Levin, there were maybe 18 co-sponsors. So we know automatically those are the supporters of the bills, but so we also wanted to bring in anybody, again, who represents parts of East Harlem. And so Councilmember Kalos has always been really good and come quite a number of times to Community Board 11. And Wilfredo is, of course, no stranger to us either. So I appreciate you again for coming tonight. And with that, I will let you have the floor, and then we will open it up to any questions afterwards.
Sure, and thank you so much, Jeremiah, for the invitation, Marlene, for sending out the invitation. The council member would have loved to have been here, but unfortunately he's like triple booked tonight. So I will try to do him justice in his stead. So this piece of legislation was introduced a while back by Councilmember Levin from Brooklyn. And Councilmember Levin is the chair of the Human Services Committee. And a lot of the work that he's done legislatively has been around reintegration of formerly incarcerated individuals, and as well as dealing with a lot of the issues that stem from human services, homeless shelters, things like that. He's also been a very big advocate in terms of creating a better way for individuals who are coming out of Rikers to be reintegrated into the community. So this bill, which it's called the Fair Chance Housing Act, as Jeremiah said, will essentially eliminate the opportunity for landlords, realty companies, realtors, from asking whether or not a person has a criminal record, or compelling folks to submit to a criminal background check. I mean, the facts are pretty, pretty, they surprised me as I did research, but 1 in 3 people in the United States has a criminal record. When you look at individuals in, in New York, the incarceration rate is about 443 people incarcerated for every 100,000 people. Amongst the Black and Latino populations, about 16 to 18% respectively have been incarcerated or are currently incarcerated. So that obviously leads to a lot of racial disparities when it comes to housing equity. So the lack of availability for formerly incarcerated people, really creates a barrier to reintegration, and in many cases leads to a cycle of, perpetuating criminality. There's no secret that about, 30 to 50% of the people that are currently living on the street have a criminal record, and for most of those people, the rate of criminal activity increases the longer they're on the street. So the goal of this, legislation is to allow opportunities for formerly incarcerated people to find housing. One of the greatest issues with dealing with like the population from Rikers is that a lot of them are eligible for release. Either they've already met the required time, for whatever sentence, and we're talking about people who are either post-sentence for a misdemeanor or are being held pre-sentence until trial. Many people are qualified for release, but are being held because they don't have stable housing. And in some instances, stable housing is a prerequisite. They either have to go into a shelter, and when the shelters are full, they get held longer than they have to. So you deal with a small percentage of people who are being held, for no other reason than they don't have a place to go. So the goal is to allow folks to transition from shelters who have, some sort of criminal background or has some issues with criminality in the past, to find stable housing, to then open up the shelter population for folks coming, directly from jail, and then from there have them, eventually transition into more permanent housing. This bill has a lot of support within the council. It was heard on September 15th of this year, and it received wide support both from a lot of nonprofit organizations that deal with both homelessness, housing justice, and also criminal justice. It also received a lot of support from the administration. HPD and DHS both testified in favor of the bill, and HPD would love to, get this ball rolling on this as soon as possible, because it'll only, allow them to continue to create more housing opportunities, especially for this population. The likelihood that this bill passes is very strong, probably within the next 6 months. There's some important distinctions that aren't exactly spelled out unless you read the text closely. First, and this is one of the questions, there's no distinction between violent and nonviolent offenses. The bill would not allow any criminal background checks. Now, the important thing to know is if you're concerned about someone with, any sort of sexual predator past, or someone who's on the sexual offense registry, those people have to disclose and they have to register with the state. That state law supersedes this, so that won't change it. So if there's someone who is applying for an apartment and they're, a registered sex offender, they will still have to disclose that regardless of this law. And that's because that's a state law. Also, this would not apply to public housing. So all of the NYCHA developments in our district would not be affected by this law. So the federal government has, certain prohibitions against people who have violent or drug felonies on their records. They can't live in public housing. This law will not affect that. The federal law supersedes it. And in terms of, well, I'll leave it at that, and I'll leave it to any question. Oh, sorry. The other thing is, if you're renting a room in your home and you or a family member lives there, and we're talking about, like, imagine you have a 2-bedroom apartment and you're renting one room in that bedroom to someone else. If you have a roommate, you can still ask the question and you can still run a background check. This law does not apply to that situation. It only applies in a situation where you're actually renting out a unit, an actually legally defined unit within your home. So if you're renting out a spare room or spare bedroom, this would not apply. You still have the ability to ask the question or even run a background check. So I'll leave it at that. And I look forward to any questions that any members of the committee have.
Thanks, Wilfredo. That's really good to hear, and also good to know sort of just what the general, the building consensus is among the council members. And I'm not surprised, obviously, that there's a lot of nonprofits, right? Like you said, in criminal justice reform that are involved in this. And then there's other people too, like even just that, started off as housing advocates or whatever it might be, but then you just realize that so many of these issues are not in silos, right? There's so many things that perpetuate cycles and really affect, and there's dominoes and things that affect other things. So, yeah, I was really wondering when it came to that distinction argument, right? Because I had mentioned at our last committee meeting that there is strong support from and advocacy, right? Outspoken public advocacy from, the council, general counsel, for example, for the Rent Stabilization Association. And I think maybe even REBNY or some other, landlord trade groups, organizations and associations have been outspoken about the need to protect, duty to protect the tenants already residing there too, right? The safety and welfare of the tenants. So I think that there's this narrative that I've seen developing that is sort of positioning folks as the moderate argument, right? There's folks saying like, oh, we're sympathetic to that idea that, you got, you had a bag of weed when you're, 17 years old, in high school and your senior year, and then like you can never shake it and you can't get a job, you can't get, whatever the case may be. They're like, okay, I'm sympathetic to that. But then, the guy who did just do 30 years for murder or, something of some other violent crime that might not qualify for, sexual offender registry, for example. So you don't have that other protection already in there. So what do you say to that argument that, I think there are a lot of people are thinking that might be a reasonable moderate path, but
yeah. No, and I definitely appreciate it. And I've had conversations with folks in REBNY. They've reached out about this bill. And you're right, people do frame it in a sort of, well, I understand about these folks here, but let's talk about the very ultra dangerous individuals. There's no secret that, there's a convergence between, some types of crime and mental health. Whether it be people not receiving the type of care they need, and that leads them into a path of criminality and things like that. And obviously, this bill is not meant to address all those issues. There are other policies in place that are, meant to truly identify and treat those very specific issues. For the folks who have concerns about, someone who just finished a 30-year, bid for murder, and they've come home. we have to start looking at it in the way that those people have paid their debt to society. And very, well-researched studies, and I can send you links to supporting documentation that looked at this, find that anywhere between 60 and 70% of individuals who transition from, any sort of incarceration to a stable home life, meaning they have a place to stay, have a place to live, between 60 and 70% of those people are not likely to become recidivists. So people, will fall back into criminality if you leave them out on the street with absolutely no support. They're going to start with petty theft and work their way up until, something terrible happens. I've made no secret of this. I'm a former prosecutor. I worked at the Brooklyn DA's office, and I saw the correlation between folks who were being released and going into a stable home life versus those who were not, in terms of who were the recidivists, who were the, the continual offenders. And those two things go hand in hand. So, we do have to, accept the fact that there's nothing stopping that from happening now. The way people get around it now is, they stay with a family member who, who lets them stay there, and they're not on the lease. They're not able to rent a place on their own, but there's nothing stopping, someone with a criminal record, regardless of what it is, from, staying and crashing on someone's couch. We want to eliminate that because those aren't stable, and those aren't sustainable. We want to be able to get them into actual stable housing. And I don't think that, in situations where you have folks who are in homeless shelters now, regardless of what their background is, putting them into stable housing is a net positive for everyone involved. So we need to kind of, stop focusing so much on those outlying cases of, what happens if a murderer moves in next door, and look at more the majority of the people who are actually coming home are coming home for nonviolent drug offenses. And those with mental health issues that led them to to be convicted of very serious crimes. We need to, kill the logjam in the system to allow them to get the help they need. So, I truly appreciate, the sentiment, but we need to start looking beyond that and start looking at, really addressing the bottom line issue, which is people need places to live.
Thanks, Wilfredo. I also wanted to know, because I know that another thing that I was wondering is you mentioned the exception to if you're renting a room, right, within your apartment, you can still subject folks to the criminal background check and or inquire into criminal history or arrest history, right? But is there any similar such exception for, say, a 2 or 3 family owner occupied brownstone?
No, the way that the bill is written, it doesn't make determinations between multiple dwellings or multiple units within the same dwelling. It basically treats a unit, meaning it's its own address, as the kind of, it's what determines it. So if it's a house and you have, let's say you're running a boarding house and you have 5 bedrooms, each one of those bedrooms, you're renting it out to someone different. And we're not talking short-term rentals. We're not talking about Airbnb. We're talking about you just renting your room month to month. Maybe you have people sign a lease. Those people, that there's an exception in the law in that one, for that case. But if you have a 3 family and each one of the, the units are separate from your unit, then this law would apply. You can't ask, people in those units about their criminal background.
Got you. Thank you. Okay. And then just to make sure it's clear to everyone here, just to beat the dead horse, and then I'll move to Xavier's question, is because it applies, and you said there's no distinction between those that qualify as multiple dwellings or otherwise, So even if it's like, for example, you're a small homeowner or just condo owner and you're going to rent out your unit, you're also similarly subjected. This is the only unit you own and you're
As
renting.
as long as you or anyone who is a family member is not living in the unit that
Right.
you're trying to rent out at the time,
Yeah.
you will be subjected to it. So if Jeremiah, if you own a condo, you know, and you, let's say you live elsewhere and you're renting that condo and no one else is living there, you cannot ask. But if you're living there and you're just renting out a room, yes, you can ask.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mhm.
Xavier?
Thank you, Wilfredo, for being here. Can you post a link to the current draft into our chat? That would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just pull that up.
Yep, that's great. Then following up on the questions, and thank you, Jeremiah, you read my mind. Given the history of CB11, CB10, CB9, and even 12, there are a high amount of people who stayed behind during the 60s, 70s, and 80s and acquired townhouses. They also converted them or maintained them as SROs. So the first question is, will people who have a setup that still has SROs legally, will this apply to them? Because they're technically renting out a room month to month, but it's not a unit, it's in the entirety of that dwelling.
So that's a really interesting question, and I haven't explored the SRO question. I can, speak to the drafters of the bill and see if they have any determination. I know that the number of SROs that are, currently available has decreased a lot over the last few decades, but I do know they still exist, and I do know residents that currently live in them. I can get back. I can send the committee, an update in a day or two with that answer, because that's a very, very specific case. And I think that my firm guess would be it would depend on how the SRO is set up. If each individual room is considered its own unit, then no, this wouldn't apply. Sorry, yes, it would apply, but if they're not, if it's just considered one, like a boarding style home, then no, this would be exempted. But I would have to get more clarification on that specific issue.
Okay, and then Jeremiah, if I may, a couple follow-up questions to that. Thank you. Given the history of our neighborhood, and for those that go generations back, a lot of these buildings were acquired during our what could be called a blighted time, and they bought many of the SROs, or they stayed behind and they turned them into HDFCs. So I think it would be worth consideration that you examine those townhomes that were SROs or converted. Some of them maintain the ability to either rent a level, but we're still a single dwelling, and have a border, and it's still within that gray area, that kind of purgatory of DOB, where they still have that one door access going down a level that can be latched, and you still have the egress and ingress for fire requirements. I think that's something, given the amount in our neighborhood and the surrounding Upper Manhattan districts, to be taken under consideration. And that leads me to my next question, which is our HDFCs. Some of them, there are co-ops. I know we've mentioned condos, but co-ops often, especially in the HDFCs, may hold on one or two, and they use those to rent out. Would that apply to them as well?
So in that situation where it's one owner of multiple HDFCs, even if they're on the same floor, if they have a separate entrance and they're not, connected internally, meaning like you tear down a wall just to, make it a double or triple unit. If it's individual units owned by the same owner, even if the owner lives in one of them, those separate units would be they'd be subject to this bill. But if they have internal access, meaning they could be seen as one large unit, one multiple unit, and you're renting out, but you still have the ability to freely pass through, that would be considered one unit. And in that case, you would not be subjected into it. So it's going to be kind of how it's designated. And again, whenever you're doing any sort of like, conjoining of multiple units, DOB typically has to do inspections to ensure that you're not putting a door through a load-bearing wall and whatnot. And they're usually designated as one unit. Sometimes it's one unit with like an alphanumeric letter next to it in order to distinguish the entries. In those situations, no, you don't have to ask. But if it's considered separate units, yes. So it would depend on how it's structured, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes sense knowing how the intricacies of DOB. So that's fine. I just make sure that, especially because our district has always been about survival at the worst and best of times, and to make sure that that message is disseminated far and wide, so that people are informed and know what is coming up on and what they're responsible for, because oftentimes it's not communicated as effectively, and then we're having to scramble. Thanks, Jeremiah. Thanks, Wilfredo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else on the committee? I don't see any other hands up, so feel free to ask any questions, particularly while we have a representative from a council member here. If you have any questions about, other supporters of the bill in the council, or other questions about how it's working out there in the body, or anything else generally.
And just put out there, there are currently 21 members since in the last few weeks. A few more people have signed on, but there are currently 21. The link that I sent you to, looks like the link I sends everyone. If you click on the link, it says calendar up top. There's also one that says legislation. But let me see if I can get the actual summary, the link directly. So thanks, Stephanie.
Stephanie, do you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, that was my question. I
Okay.
was trying to get to the legislation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, I see Tamika Matt, your hand's up. Go ahead if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I have a question. I just want to know, are we going to be doing any legislation to help landlords right now? Since tenant got some relief, our landlords are suffering as well. And I just want to know what protections and what ideas and what relief can landlords get, especially our small landlords that's hurting right now.
So thank you for the question, Tamika. The council is currently, there's a few bills that are starting to bubble up around, some sort of, landlord relief programs. The problem is they're heavily reliant on both state and federal action at the moment. The council has, some power in, staying, property tax, or lien sales and things like that, which, recently a lot of those lien sale eligible properties, the lien sale bill was scrapped. So, it puts a tentative stay on lien sales for the time being. But a lot of the stuff that we want to do at the council is reliant on, state and federal support. Now, I know that our partners in Albany, part of their legislative agenda this term is, around tenant and landlord relief. There are several bills, that have been introduced to help both tenants and, small landlords, get through, this pandemic. Really wish, that there was more that I could, offer in terms of stuff that we're doing at the council, but, it's kind of like on issues like this, we're very, very reliant on, the other bodies. But fingers crossed, new year, new term, new administration federally, hoping that a lot of that relief comes down and, will cycle itself through as quickly as possible. It's not the answer you want. I'm really sorry, but it's the only one that I can give at the moment.
All right. Thank you so much.
Of
I would
course.
also like to add to that I know that you may already be aware of this, Tamika, but Community Board 11 adopted a resolution in 2020 calling for the cancellation of rents, but as well as forgiveness of mortgage payments for small home owners and small landlords. So that was the position we took. Obviously, we've had deep discussions on this about the balancing of the equities, who should shoulder the burden, bailouts, where they should be placed, where they've historically gone, where we think they should go now. So all of that's happened in the past, and you probably were here because I know you've come to our committee meeting probably many times now. Yeah, I just want to draw attention to that as well, that's a position that we support as a community board. And there are some, really progressive politicians in Albany that also are of that mind. But, it's been pretty piecemeal up to this point about what's been accomplished. To this point, I think Senator Myree's legislative moratorium is probably the most aggressive and is the only one that reflects truly one of the prongs of the platform of the tenants movement in New York State. One of them is calling for a legislative moratorium during the entirety of the pandemic plus 1 year. And that's a bill that Senator Myree has introduced as well. But for what that's worth as well. But it's, again, we're just, the local body calling for this and thinking this is something that would be beneficial for the folks that live in Community District 11 here in East Harlem. Let's see, if anyone else, Xavier, if you have something to add to that topic, I'll go to you. Otherwise, I'm going to go to Joanne Henry first.
Go ahead to Joanne, and then you can circle back. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So we'll go to you just after Joanne Henry. So go on ahead, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thank you for very much for allowing me to speak. I have not been a part of Community Board 11 in a long time. And I was wondering, listening to the presentation, which is awesome, it just seems like we're surrounded by NYCHA housing and co-ops and condominiums. So the confusion to me is this legislation, it seems to be limited. There's a problem in NYCHA about the same problem. We also have grandchildren who come out of the criminal justice system, which it's not clear that these people will be able to get housing. It seems like you're limiting it. And I was wondering, is there a reason for that? I hear you saying about the federal proposal that doesn't apply because we're in states. But why can't, since we have largely done things ahead of the federal government, why can't we get this proposal dealt with NYCHA housing, the condominiums and co-ops within Community Board 11? It seems to me this is limited to outside of Community Board 11.
Thanks, Joanne, for that question. So this would apply to condos and co-ops. The only time it doesn't apply to condos and co-ops are if you're living there and you're renting a room. Like,
I understand that.
That's when it doesn't apply. But if you are a co-op owner and you're renting a unit and you don't reside and none of your family members reside there, then this law would apply. In terms of NYCHA, the reason why is the federal regulations supersede the state and the city ability. So there's very little we can do with Section 8 and Section 9 housing when it comes to this. Now, the city does have, and this is allowable by the federal regulation. It's not like you're automatically barred from ever living in public housing if you have a criminal record. It's just depending on the conviction. Some have like waiting periods. Others are a complete ban. Some of them are not.
It's all discrimination, though.
It has been argued that a lot of those policies are discriminatory in nature, and there are challenges that have been brought, but unfortunately, none have been able to succeed in overturning those regulations. I will say that there are some new members of Congress that have come in and have talked about this in their platform in terms of wanting to create more equity in the Section 8 and Section 9 housing, programs, because they specifically affect New York City. People like Richie Torres and Jamal Bowman have made comments during their their campaigns that these would be things that they would want to address. Unfortunately, we're just limited in how much we can tell NYCHA in terms of what they can do around this, which is why, in order to avoid any sort of legal barrier from doing this at all, the entire Section 9 and Section 8 parts of the housing, which is NYCHA and Section 8 housing, were completely excluded from this bill. If we had the power to do it, I'm sure we would absolutely try to do it at the council, but it's something we have to work within the frameworks of the federal system. So again, not the answer you wanted, but hopefully it clarifies some of the confusion between the different levels.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yes, thank you for that question. Yeah, things can get very involved when we start talking about the various levels. It's funny because we talk about housing attorneys. It's become a popular job because of the way the city has expanded the right to counsel in housing cases, housing court cases. It's become considered this sort of entry-level job. But I have these old school supervisors that say you used to never be able to get hired for a housing job in even in legal services unless you had many years of experience, because of how complex and multi-layered housing is. The federal, the state, the city regulations, subsidies, different oversight, all these sorts of things, compliance.
You literally become a well-rounded litigator doing housing law, and it's very interesting because you never think about it. But you're right; it hits every level of the justice system.
Right. Exactly. There's always something. There's sometimes some little catch that's just not fair to one of my clients. All my other clients have this benefit, but this one client has this. This program funds its building and has certain regulations that attach to it. So it can get very nuanced as well. Let's see, Xavier, we'll move on to what you have. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very helpful conversation. Joanne, thank you for attending our meeting, and please implore others to come along. It's never been easier, even during this time of tragedy. This pandemic has taken so many of the people we cherish and love. Look, I'm going to be frank. I make no bones about it that what we're dealing with is, I often allude to, it's righting the wrongs of Robert Moses when it comes to our city. And you are talking about the layers, the city, the state, and the federal, and those issues do intersect often, as Jeremiah and I have all too frequently discussed these matters, and Wilfredo as well. But I think I think this is just one component, and the larger part is making sure that it is communicated well. We do try to educate people on the housing committee, and we will be, I know Jeremiah, not to jump the gun, but I think that's something we're going to be bringing up this session. And we are here as an informational resource, but oftentimes for the past several years, we've tried to bring people in and educate them and empower them, so that way they can walk away and be independent and then work together to find solutions. And it's important that when you work with Community Board 11 or CB 8, 10, 9, 12, all of them in the upper Manhattan area, we try to coordinate together to find these solutions and to work with our elected. So if we're going to make that active change that you're desiring, I think that's important to, one, we get the education, we know who to coordinate and talk with. Because a lot of people, it's not just affecting people here in New York, it's affecting people in Savannah, Georgia, or Chicago, or Los Angeles. Those remaining areas that have public housing as well are beholden to the legal requirements and restrictions. So that's it. And I appreciate everyone coming on and continuing this conversation.
Thanks, Xavier. All right, so I don't see any other hands up, so I'm going to give one last chance before we let Wilfredo go here. Any other questions, whether you're in the public or on the committee, feel free to raise your hand. All right, well, we don't see anything. We shared the link with the attendees, the public as well. So thank you for that, for the text of the bill. If anybody, of course, has any questions that come up subsequent to this, it dawns on you later, feel free to bring it up. We can follow up as well with Wilfredo on anyone's behalf, or if there's any other thing.
And Marlene, if it's okay, I'll send you a written answer to the question that Xavier put out around SROs. If you could forward it to the committee, I'll copy Xavier and I'll copy Jeremiah on it.
Sure, yes.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. All right, well, thanks so much for coming in and taking time to talk about that.
Thank you for the invitation, and enjoy the rest of your meeting. Thank you so much.
Take care. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
All right, folks. So with that, we're going to move on to, we're going to touch here upon the New York City Housing Authority Blueprint for Change. So I sent an email earlier today just asking folks to just look over the materials. It was a 19-page packet, little presentation was the PDF that NYCHA had provided to us. And there was also a link in there. And, so NYCHA's obviously got it on their website, and there's a video there. So this is the major rollout here, right? You've seen things like NYCHA 2.0, PACS, RAD, so we're here in the Blueprint for Change era. And I know for a long time, we talked about the $32 billion in capital needs that was a huge deficit that NYCHA needs. And now I am, of course, not pleased, but now see it's $40 million is what it's $40 billion, sorry, $1 billion is what is estimated from what I'm seeing in these materials here. So they're talking about $1 billion added per year, I believe, is what I remember from the materials, that the rate of, the ballooning of the deficit, the building of that deficit in capital needs, in terms of the capital needs that NYCHA needs across across all of its projects and developments around the city. And of course, the presentation was more detailed about what level of funding NYCHA estimates it needs right now to sustain, right, to make certain crucial infrastructure improvements that are badly needed across the city. And it goes into the ways that it's looking to tap into the funding, the federal funding, and the conversion of these different vouchers, and the mechanisms they're going to use, right? This public entity, the public trust that will take over management. But of course, there's questions here, generally about, privatization that people are worried about. NYCHA directly addresses, or at least attempts to address it in the materials that were shared with you all today. So I just wanted to open up the floor for us to discuss it now, to see what people's initial impressions are, any concerns, confusion, questions, because what we want to do is bring NYCHA back in February, but I will bring them back if we can, know that there's question, because they presented materials to us, but I want us to look at those, to digest them a little bit and see if there's anything that we want to push them on, any gaps we see, any concerns we still have, because those are the sorts of things that I'm happy to have NYCHA come back, because that's a follow-up conversation. That's to further educate us as a board, as sitting on the committee that's overseeing one of the top 3 most important issues listed for, the residents of East Harlem, of whom a full one third are NYCHA residents. So, so that's the brief overview. Again, the materials I think were pretty simple, well, as much as could be. I thought they didn't do a terrible job of what can be a very complex thing. I don't envy NYCHA's PR team here. That's got to go out, and the community engagement teams, because I can only imagine it is complex. Housing can be very complex, and the funding streams and what's set up in order to try to improve efficiencies. But this is what is, it's called the blueprint for change. So this is what is envisioned as what will, bring us to long-term infrastructure improvements that also include like green improvements and other things to try and make it a more efficient buildings, as well as management, right? Because the trust will, this entity will take over management and maintenance of the facilities during the term of its lease. Okay, so NYCHA retains control of the land and will put out a land lease, and somebody will take over the right for construction projects and maintenance and management, but will not have ownership of the property. NYCHA will retain it as public property. So again, that's the very brief overview. I'm sure NYCHA did an even better job, obviously, of laying it out, but we all have had the materials for a little bit. Let's, again, just open the floor. What are people's initial impressions? Again, I want to bring them back next month. Marlene can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think we quite contacted them to nail them down for February, or did we?
No, I just want to go back with some concrete questions for them.
That is exactly right. Okay, so that's what I was hoping you'd say, because I remember that's what, yeah, so in other words, I want us to talk about this because I want to bring them back, but I will only bring them back for them to answer, for it to be a follow-up conversation, not a representation of what we've been shared. That being said, I hope people have some thoughts now. Let me know. And yeah, so the floor is open. Oh, I will give just a moment for the committee to chime in. I do see the hands from the public, and I'm going to get to you, but I'll start, hand came up and down in the committee. So I'll go to the public. Okay. I do apologize because unless somebody knows who was first, I'm just gonna go from, I'm gonna go with Tamika Mapp again, and then we'll go down the line. It'll be Osendi and then Nai.
Oh, thank you so much. My only question that I'm going to have is the Section 3 portion. They say strengthen the Section 3 because you right now, NYCHA is really not following this, the Section 3, which is creating jobs, opportunities besides the construction company of it all, providing education for home ownership and for the possibilities, and creating jobs, permanent jobs. So how do we guarantee that they're going to strengthen that or maintain that underneath the blueprint plan?
I think that is a very wonderful question, because one thing is to make promises. The next is to hold folks accountable and to ensure that they are fulfilled and complied with, right? All the commitments that are made, because there were roundtables, there were legal services organizations, there were community residents, tenants association leaders, or residents association leaders, in NYCHA buildings, who were talking about all the protections that needed to remain in place for this to even be a starting point. But how will we know that that will not be a slippery slope and it will actually be complied with? So I think that's a wonderful question. Does anyone have the answer, or else we can talk about that? Because obviously we also have ideas. Sometimes it comes down to committee. We also sometimes will have folks come back to us, right? We can insist on a sort of compliance checks of our own, or at least check-ins, right? Like, we're not auditing them or anything, but we're checking in to see where they're at on the commitments they've made. And but as far as what's already established in the blueprint for change, I don't know if somebody knows and wants to add into that.
Just really fast, Jeremiah, if I may.
Yes, you may.
Right, sure. So NYCHA's plan would cover 3 areas. Their main thing is capital, right? So to answer your question, Tamika, their transformation is for structure. The stabilization plan is what you're speaking about. So in addition to making the units more livable, NYCHA will also try to cover economic development, and that's where the jobs will come from in that plan. When we bring them back next week, they'll dive into it more, but the stabilization part of the plan is what will cover what you're asking for.
I do think that that's I do like the question though, again, because it's also about, again, building something more sustainable than just like, here's some housing for you. We also are trying to build, like, look at what is economic opportunity, what are ways that we can kind of serve the objectives that we're professing, in whatever little way. And there is talk in the blueprint for change for not only the short-term construction jobs, right, that come and go, but they're talking about, permanent jobs because of all this updated technology. You're going to need people to service that. And that's in the blueprint for change, right? But and there's also an alleged preference for residents that will be implemented as well with these jobs. As well, if I recall correctly, I think potential training programs of some sort.
Mhm.
But yeah. But the compliance thing, of course, is the fundamental question, really. Right? Those make promises. Okay, so we do have a lot of hands now. I will just quickly do the Osendi's not. Your hand's down, so I'll give you a chance to speak right now, Osendi, if you want to. Yeah, okay, your hand came back up. All right, go ahead. You have the floor. We don't hear you yet.
Okay, Osendi, it's saying that you're using an older version of Zoom and the only way you can speak is if I promote you to panelist. No problem. I'll promote you to panelist.
All right, Cindy, you've been promoted. The floor is yours.
2021 came in with an upgrade. Excellent. Thank you for allowing me to speak. While the blueprint for change does have some good options, my biggest concern is the change that it would go from section 9 to section 8. As Tamika mentioned, this would do away with section 3 that is supposed to be giving tenants an opportunity to further their education and provide their expertise to providing support to New York City Housing Authority. Unfortunately, as it stands, Section 3 is severely underused, and when it has been used, and this was actually brought up by the union contractors that are have been using the tenants that have been trained under this program, that this training is useless. In the long term, it's useless because they're not being trained properly. They're not actually being given a long-term option for the training. It's been severely limited. Yes, so Section 3 needs to be reexamined and needs to make sure that it's actually kept, because it's a protection that our tenants need. Another very huge concern that I have is the fact that I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Yes, my biggest concern is how these changes will happen. Our tenants will have been told that, with this new income, there will be an upgrade to the buildings, but they will be missing out on not only having a say on how these changes are going to be coming in. So I would like to make sure that it's noted that tenant participation needs to be a huge part of this upcoming change, because as much as a lot of us aren't comfortable with this change, we need our tenants need to make sure that they're actually included, and not just in for photo ops, or just to actually listen to the issues that our tenants are having. And yeah.
Thank you, Osendi. I appreciate that. I think those are also concerns that if we get these questions all written down, and some of these concerns, also if you want to memorialize, I'm trying to take notes and keep it as good a track as possible, but Osendi or anybody who's raising concerns, if you want to email me or the staff, Community Board 11, any questions or concerns that you have or memorialize what you're raising now, I would feel free to I would love to make that part of what we would want to ask and talk about as concerns or questions that we have. And that, is precisely what I'm talking about to, invite NYCHA back in February.
Absolutely. Maybe I should be a bit more concise. I am concerned that the rights of our tenants will be bypassed simply because NYCHA is trying to improve the way that our buildings look. And I'll definitely email you about it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Okay, Nai.
Hey guys, sorry, on two different calls the night before the Georgia elections. Just two quick things from the blueprint that I noticed before that I have questions about. I'm not sure if anybody here can answer, but just to put it on the radar of our amazing committee, one in chapter 2 and one in chapter 3. So in chapter 2, there's a whole conversation, an outline about HUD agreements and obligations, a lot having to do with its business policies and procedures. We know in East Harlem that there is a history of vendors not producing the work that they've been paid with tax dollars to complete. For example, Taft Houses has a boiler go out every winter. I know that they were without heat and hot water just a couple of weeks ago in the middle of our snowstorm. And the same vendor is just rehired to do work, and then the same result happens. And there really is no recourse. There really is no refund of the monies back to NYCHA or to the taxpayers for the lack of, or poor, I should say, work that is repeatedly done. And so I feel like there needs to be some strengthening around their contracts, their vendors, compliance and transparency in that area. And the second was, we've had a huge issue in East Harlem, I think of Wagner Houses, also Taft Houses and others, where space that was community space for senior centers, for youth activities, even just rooms that were meant for TA meetings have been sold out from under the tenants and residents without any notice. We just had an issue recently in Taft Houses where they signed a contract for space for a TA office and for meetings, and then got notice after that contract had been in place for a year that the space was going to be sold. We had to advocate and work with them to get the space, set for them so that they would have a place to meet, especially considering they don't have a community space for their members, or excuse me, their residents and for their youth. And we know that that leads to other issues, right? When kids and people don't have places to safely congregate, it leads to other issues in the community. So I think it would be important as part of that governance structure for there to be a mandate about how that communication happens before there are any sales of any spaces, whether it's transforming a park into parking lots or selling off pieces of property to other developers, et cetera. And I feel that that's missing. And I didn't know if maybe I overlooked that, and if those two items are being addressed in here and maybe other chapters. And so I didn't know if anybody could speak to that.
I don't know if anyone can speak to that specifically. I know that's not, I know those are sort of some bigger issues that are being raised, but they're obviously relevant as well, because, we're talking about revamping and pumping in tons of money into, construction, infrastructure improvements, all that sort of thing. The work should be, it should be workmanlike. Workmanlike manner, right, is what they say. So that's really big. I think the oversight thing, transparency, is a really great point, and one that I would love to also push as much as possible, because that's the main thing, is that there's just a lot of distrust that's rampant among NYCHA. I know there's a lot of people who are really great at reaching out and trying to revamp and overhaul a lot of the PR and the community outreach and liaising with community boards and local organizations. But I know there's a lot more that needs to be done to dispel that. But I don't know if anyone has any more as far as the public spaces that are being sold, because I know that, this is not the first time that we're seeing things like that. Sometimes there have been fanfare and sometimes there's not, right? Like we also see sort of like infill or other sorts of projects where they're planning on alienating NYCHA land, right? Publicly owned land to private developers. that are often parks or, as you say, like senior centers or things like that. Some of those have been stopped due to outrage and reporting, but I truthfully I'm not aware of any mandatory reporting requirements as far as public engagement with residents, but anyone can pop in here if they know. Otherwise, that's something that I certainly not think would be worthwhile to investigate.
Jeremiah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so real quick, and thank you, Nye, thank you, Tamika, and everyone else who's brought up questions. I think and I appreciate you mentioning Taft, because I literally made phone calls to Brian Honan about that and several others. I think something that if we were to comment, and we should comment on this when it comes to an oversight capacity, is that management, and I don't mean at large with NYCHA, but when it gets to a point where it gets raised to our level or an elected, that means there's been a failure in the chain. And in this particular situation, there were issues when it came to fixing a lock, which is easily considered low-hanging fruit. Just changing an entry lock that's been jammed open, or just pulling out and putting in a new one and getting phone calls over that. Then when it comes to the heaters that I mentioned, when it comes to them going out at Taft and others, oftentimes it has been opined by other people within upper management that it's something as simple as like changing a setting and then it gets back online. But to get everyone to go through all the parts and processes, it takes a couple days, and that's not necessary, and that's not what they want when they pursued a decentralization of management. And John Green, and not to call you out, but John and I had multiple conversations about, and I just, because it's left an indelible mark on me, just getting cabinets put up that were sitting in the basement. Something so bleeding simple. And I think that then parlays into the previous comment about Section 3. There are groups, I know it's something like 700 strong, and there are others who have advocated for taking on the work. Like, we'll do it. We'll employ people within the developments. We will train them. We'll do it effectively. And I'm a union guy. I absolutely am. But there is a disconnect with the communication system about the chain of command, from plastering to painting. After you've done the plumbing and the structural work, things don't happen, and tickets get closed out, and it's been reported on. So I think this is something, if we're going to comment on this blueprint for change, I don't think it fully gets into the weeds. And if we are, because we've sat here and examined this, and Jeremiah, you and I have sat on stage and talked about this, you know, it's very much for those 70s and 80s children who go, hello, McFly, hello. It's that kind of moment, and it really bothers me because some of this is so patently obvious. And I think that it comes to good management. A good manager will know, and again, I use the phrase low-hanging fruit. You go change a lock. It doesn't take that long to get the lock changed. You pull it out, you put it back in. So I think those are little things, but with the heating and stuff, and then the finance that comes in, and what it costs to make that happen, that's an entirely different issue. But those are the different things, and they're all connected. They're all interrelated, but no one's really pulling the strings. And I think that's part of our job, is to point out and be Captain Obvious, because even with Taft, their community space, Jeremiah, which you just brought up, they had a for rent sign in front of their community space. Right. A for rent sign. And I had a call with Beverly Taft, and it was supposed to be removed. It was something that was settled. And the guy at the top couldn't get it removed right away because he doesn't have the staff. So it's like, all right, fine, give permission for your TA president to remove it, and then it's done. Stop showing it. So during a pandemic. So there you go. So those are some kind of updates there.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, when you talk about locks, for example, you know, a broken entrance lock, whether on the building or the apartment door, is going to be considered a C violation in a private residence, right? In a non-NYCHA residence, HPD would put a C violation, which, for those that don't know, that's considered extremely hazardous. That's the worst violation level, the ABC, from HPD. And so that's considered a C violation. That's a very big safety hazard, right? But we know how many folks will have this saga. What you mentioned is not.
And to keep it very simple, because and thank you, but it gets me very frustrated that I can know how to change a multi-cylinder lock, a multi-lock, and I can do it in 30 minutes, and I'm not an expert in it. How come we can't get someone out to do it?
Yeah, it's tough because also like repair and deduct is a remedy under the law for tenants if they have given tons of notice and a landlord's being unreasonable and not repairing. A tenant can then take it into their own hands, right? To pay for it. You can't do that with NYCHA. You can't put in the lock and then bill NYCHA for reimbursement. So.
But for public safety, I think these are things that with this blueprint for change, again, advising what are the easy things to just pick off the tree and get done, because it's just so simple. It doesn't need the bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks for that. We're going to move to Robert.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeremiah. When I was looking at the plan, I was sort of context. I serve as superintendent for a charter district, and something that jumped out at me from the plan was this idea of no resident being displaced. And the plan is clear on page 17 to talk about kind of long-term displacement, so automatic lease renewal, et cetera. I guess part of what I would love to hear more about is what happens to the resident while the work is taking place, namely the work that would impact daily life operations, a bathroom, a kitchen, heat, a boiler. Does NYCHA have a plan? I'm thinking about, effectively 18% of our students out of 3,000 students live in NYCHA housing. And so it's making me think about what's happening to those students and those families in terms of living conditions and living context while this work takes place. And is there either a private partnership or a public-to-public partnership that's going to answer the question of what happens during the work process? So I'd love to hear more about that.
So again, I answer to the best of my ability, but all of you are housing committee members yourselves and steeped very much in a lot of these housing issues. So if anyone can feel free to jump in, but I can talk as much as to my understanding.
And it was really for when they return. So you don't have to try to answer it. That's just something that was really jumping out.
Yeah, a question for them. I got you.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say also that with respect to that, just from what I understand is, that was a big concern with conversion from Section 9 to Section A and all these different things. People were talking about, are tenants going to be displaced, right? Is there any risk of eviction? And NYCHA is being very adamant that no one is at risk. You are guaranteed the right to remain. Also, qualifying family members still have succession rights, just like they always did, that sort of thing. They've been very adamant about. I know that there was also a roundtable where legal services organizations that represent low-income tenants and often NYCHA tenants were invited to a roundtable along with NYCHA and some, my understanding, some resident. I'm not sure if. I would hope there would be resident associations, representatives from the tenants, but I will verify that. But there was sort of this working group that built in a lot of these protections that were supposed to be so fundamental and that tenants would need assurances would be complied with, right? But I don't know. That's a great question. We can ask that when they come back. I don't know how much of the work. I know, like, typically if I'm in in litigation, for example, with a client who's in NYCHA housing, I've had it where the work's so extensive, I've had to do temporary relocations, and NYCHA will put them up in habitable spaces temporarily, right? So I don't know how widespread that is, right? Because if you slate a whole development, right? And it's all these floors on a high rise, what are you doing with all those folks, right? It's not like moving one person from the 12th floor to the 5th floor for a little bit, right?
Yeah. So right. So it was certainly the latter question versus the former, right? So the not being displaced succession rights, I get. A part of me, I used to live in Louisville, and part of our public housing went through a renovation process, and something that was just never clear for folks is, what do we do with tenants for, like, during asbestos removal, which we know is highly complicated? Where are we putting tenants on mass scale? And so folks tried to broker hotel partnerships and folks tried to think about temporary housing, but eventually the city hit a limit where it realized it didn't have enough capacity to house the folks who were temporarily displaced without then doing a really micro level renovation process, 10 to 12 in a building at a time, which then elongated the renovation over so many years. Ultimately, it became a financial burden on the city. So it just made me think about, for our students, for families writ large, where do they go, and how long then are we scaling renovation if we cannot place families in a temporary context? So that was all.
That's a great question. And I think they might have gleaned some lessons from as well. There was rad conversions, like in the Far Rockaways, right? Some big buildings that underwent that, like large scale improvements, complete renovations, gut renovations, all these apartments. So that was a big building. And I'm fairly certain people were displaced. I don't know where they were placed though, because I remember that was another question, right? It's like the right to return. Because sometimes you'll see crazy language in certain relocation agreements that will say your right to return to apartment, 1A or a comparable apartment. And you're like, why would you say or a comparable apartment, right? I live in 1A, right?
Yeah.
So,
and then it makes me think about, and I'll be done, it makes me think about just the timeline of this, because for us to get a single stall bathroom, for example, renovated at one of our co-located schools, the bathroom was out of order for 45 days, right? It took, so they're saying minor renovations. If it took 45 days for a single stall individual use bathroom to get a sink and a toilet replaced through Department of Buildings, et cetera, what would this mean and look like in terms of when one can return, how long folks are displaced? So it just has my mind really running with how this could impact kids and families, and then what my responsibility would be as a district leader to begin, or as a charter leader, to think about what we do, and do we begin to create our own, do we have to increase our fund of emergency private money to then have to support families who might be going through this? So.
Right, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I think those are great points. And I think that that's also something, we're talking, because I know there was also confusion that, NYCHA's saying these are not private developers or even nonprofit developers. That's not what we're doing. We're not doing that here. This is a special entity that is like a creature of the law, right? It's this public entity, this public trust entity, public NYCHA Housing Preservation Trust entity that's created under New York State law, right? Whose mission and objective is not profits, but it's providing a public benefit, right? So, but what does that look like, right? Again, because we're talking about, does that make it more efficient? Because sometimes folks are like, oh, NYCHA's so inefficient. Like, I wish I could just hire someone myself, right? So they're insinuating, I'd rather just get someone private on the side and just get it done, knocked out efficiently, right? So there is that also exists there. So, does it make it any more efficient? Does it make it a more efficient construction project manager? Right? All right, so I'll move. Raja, I know your hand's not up anymore. Do you have anything that you want to say? Appreciate that, Robert. Again, I'm going to try to compile these things and I'll circulate to the committee. So if I miss like the point you're bringing up or the questions you have, you can feel free to point that out. But there's some good input tonight, so I appreciate all this discussion. All right, Raja. And if not.
So the main question that I had was with regard to RAD, because the blueprint encompasses, I think, 110,000 apartments, and the rest 60, 70,000 units are left to RAD. And we know with RAD, there's been a higher rate of permanent displacement or eviction of those tenants. And many of the NYCHA residents actually are opposed to RAD. What's going to happen with that segment? Are they just pushing through with privatization from that part? And as the blueprint rolls out, we may start realizing that there is a higher rate of permanent displacement with this blueprint. So we'll have to have some wiggle room in there. But in the meantime, my question is that I'd have for them is, what is happening with RAD, and is that stopping during this, or are they pushing full steam ahead with the attendant evictions going on from that mechanism?
Yeah, that is also something we can bring up. You're right to point out, this doesn't cover the whole, there's 175,000 unit approximately portfolio that NYCHA's talking about across the 5 boroughs. And there's, the graphic you alluded to regarding what percentage is going to be under this plan versus, PACT or RAD, right, which is under that as well. And you're right, RAD has been a controversial thing. There have been groups that really do accuse it of being a steps toward privatization of public housing, of a public benefit, of social housing, a type of social housing. But there's folks who in NYCHA will say that RAD is not privatization at all, that it is, again, leased land, and NYCHA retains ownership, and it's a long-term lease. It could be like, I don't know, like a 99 years, something like that. I'm not sure, but, and they get the construction projects, the maintenance, the management contracts with NYCHA. And that one is different because that one I think could involve private entities versus, this public entity that we're talking about here. But that's, another thing to think about and people to note. I don't know if anyone wants to add on that point. If not, we'll add that to what we're going to be discussing. All right, Joanne Henry. I know you had your hand up for a long time. There was a lot up, so I appreciate your patience. Go ahead with your question or comment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you.
Well, first I want to say it's awesome that this title is Blueprint for Change. And secondly, I want to say sometimes ideas become overwhelming and nonsensical. And that's for NYCHA. I'm talking about what it was in the beginning, what it is in the future, what it is now. My question is how, I like the idea of you saying how to hold the NYCHA folks accountable. And I think that's really the issue. Because all the things that you talked about, unfortunately, I'm in my going on 80, and we've had all those discussions in Community Board 11 from the 70s, the 80s and 90s. And it sounds like it's overwhelming, but it's extreme. So I think the most important thing is how to hold them accountable. And that's the issue. Because if I listened to the gentleman, if I want my keychain and my door fixed, it doesn't take a great deal of effort to get that done. And one of the things that I have learned is organizing a particular building. I don't want to get into it now, but organizing a particular building will get those things done, particularly if you know how to do it. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I also appreciate what you said about organizing. I'm a little bit biased. I do like working with community organizers, and tenant organizers. And a lot of times that's tenants themselves. Anyone can be a tenant organizer, it's not just the paid tenant organizers. And most of the time,
yes.
Most of the time it is the folks organizing themselves. So I appreciate that point. And again, the accountability, again, that point is loud and clear. All right, so Candy and then Stephanie after that. So Candy, go ahead.
Hi, but Stephanie had her hand up before me, so can I yield my time to Stephanie?
Oh yeah, for sure. I thought it was the other way around, which is why.
Yeah, no, I had it up first, then I put it down, but then I saw Stephanie up before me. So
I was doing the same thing though. So
you're gonna try. You're getting tired virtually too, with the hand being. All right, either one of you, go ahead. Stephanie, I guess you can go ahead.
thank you, Candy. So I guess for full disclosure, I work for NYCHA, and I also live in NYCHA. I think my question, and I haven't asked this, and we're talking about Blueprint not only outside of NYCHA to like community boards, but they are also talking to people who work in NYCHA about NYCHA for Blueprint because they want everyone to be on board with the change and to understand the changes. But I think my question, again, and I don't know if it's appropriate question, but we do know that we're we do know that we're going to have a new administration, right? With this new administration, federal administration, I don't know if we should be pushing forward to have this blueprint for change when we may be able, with this new administration, ask for the funds that we need through HUD. And also, we've seen that every time we get a new chairperson in NYCHA, like one program will come in and that program will go out. Or now we have a new initiative and this program, we're kind of like not gonna take it in. So how do we know if we continue on with this new blueprint change that the new person, if we do have a new chairperson, we're going to have this? And again, I don't know if it's appropriate for me to ask these questions, but I'm just wondering how that's gonna look, because we're also gonna have a whole new mayor who may be putting in a new person to be working in NYCHA. So I'm wondering, how is this gonna look, and should this be the time for us to do these changes, or should this be something that maybe we should wait till this new administration and these new changes come in?
That's a wonderful question as well, because, we've talked about this. I think, it's now like 4+ years or so, I guess 4 to 5 years I've been on the board. We've been having, we're always having these NYCHA conversations, the deficit, the capital needs deficit's always been just towering and getting worse. But we talk about that. We also talk about how there has been a history though of, disinvestment, right? Defunding, just depriving them of the NYCHA of the capital that it needs. So yes, we can talk about efficiencies, getting administration, more efficient administration, streamlining this, that, and the other, but it also just never had the funds. Like, it was being starved of that fund. So even if you wanted to, you could have the most ambitious, efficient person from the private sector in the world come over and try to implement changes, or, if you think that's a good thing. But that sort of thing, it just won't happen without the money. So that's a good question. I do think that, obviously, and I had talked about the Georgia State or Georgia U.S. Senate runoff, that can determine the control of the Senate. So like, if we're talking about funding, that Republican Senate's a big roadblock, right? For anything. I mean, look at the roadblock just to put $2,000 checks, like little $2,000 checks in people's pockets, right? It was, McConnell was making sure to hold that up. So unless it was tied to like establishing voter fraud commissions and some other god-awful waste of taxpayer money, right? So that is also a crucial question, right? Like, what happens tomorrow? Or next month, we could be having a very different conversation. So I think that's also very relevant to ask, because I think that it is like, number one, like all this twisting and turning, but if the spigots can open up even a little bit, you couple that with something more ambitious, then maybe we have a formula. But that's also a good question as far as, I don't know what to say as far as like the new chairperson thing, because I know a lot of this is political. And also really does unfortunately depend on how much whoever is holding these positions of powers actually care about the public housing system, right? So it is very tenuous. But that's a great point, what you bring up. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on that, beyond what I've mentioned already. Ivy, your hand just went up. Is it about that? If so, you can go ahead and talk.
But Candy's still on hold. I go next.
No, I was just asking if anyone had thoughts about Stephanie's point before we move to your question.
I do.
Yeah, I'm not skipping you, Candy. Don't worry.
No. Because what Stephanie said is valid, and
oh, you have something on that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So Stephanie, I don't know if you were able to attend when they had the residents. There was posters posted up for the residents to attend with the chair that he was going to give the presentation about that. I also live in NYCHA too, just full disclosure. And for those who don't know, and there were a lot of questions that I had towards the presentation, and a lot of we all had good questions and concerns. And the fact that those 40, the billions of dollars, because by the time you come to look at it, it's going to go higher, the $40 billion. But the truth of the matter is that in order for them to really want to fix those changes, they really have to go after the existing contractors that they've already paid and didn't do the work. And then they keep getting new workers, new contractors, right? We've asked him, he said he would like to your question about staying on as administrator, he would like to stay on and hopefully be the one to be the closer, because that's how they brought him in. To me, I see him to be the closer to do what he put the example from what he did in the other states where he came from. I felt uncomfortable about that because I've heard how he's just, a lot of these housing developments became demolished, or overturned, and New York City is a whole big ball game than the ones from the states that he's come from. We've asked a lot of questions, and one of the questions were who will be the people to establish the trust and how are they going to be selected? Because that's a big major factor when you're trying to say a trust. It could be private lenders, like it can be investors and elected officials. Like who is it that's going to be the makeup? Because it's going to sound like if it's an ad hoc committee on top of the board of the authority. He said that they were going to select some residents, but it will be like 2 residents, and I don't think that that's sufficient, not for the size amount of housing developments we have. If anything, it should be selected by every housing units, by each housing development, and not just 2. And then they'll be mute like the ones that we have right now, that we can't even have any residents to be engaged. They can't come to any tenant association meetings without having permission from the people from NYCHA to represent and be at the meetings, right? So we had concerns about that. And there wasn't that was his answer to that. The other thing we were talking about was about the land, and he said it's going to be in perpetuity. Once it's transferred, it must have existing rent-based income, and they want to use the federal income money. But that's something that they don't even have that. That is not even for sure. Like most of the stuff is like we're guessing that this is what we're going to do, this is what we plan. It's not something that it's really concrete. And to me, it's just like, I think we have more way in right now, and I hope that we can have more time, considering that we have a new administration that is going to really look at it. I mean, like dissect the whole entire blueprint. It has to be, because this is a different type of administration compared to what we got right now. And then as far as the Section 8 question we asked was, if the Section 8 voucher not being portable, what will be the policy for the tenants not meeting the income guidelines for the Section 8? And do you request to have them removed from tenancy if in that unit they don't qualify? There's still not enough answers on that there. And then he also mentioned something about succession rights, but he didn't get into it. So we asked what are the new guidelines and the new and the old policy, and that's still up in the air. So I felt that the whole presentation was like to say like, hey, we're doing something new, but we want to know about what are you doing about the existing to get us out of that hole and stop spending money, the existing money they have right now, and all these policies that they have, not wait till this blueprint comes and it gets approved. So there's a lot of questions that I hope he comes back and he gives us the right answers, because we really didn't have a lot of answers from him, and he tried to, he cut it short. So
Thanks, Candy. Well, very good questions. I know those came up with the RAD rounds. I was very familiar with that, very specific as well. John, did you still have something to add? I know you were going to say something earlier. You're still muted, John.
Oh, okay. Not anything really to add, but the thing is, what Candy and Stephanie said is I totally agree with. The thing is that one, will this blueprint for change be worth the paper it's written on 1 year from today? The thing is that will they get what they need from the state legislature and from Congress? The thing is, there's more questions than answers. And the thing is that until they start coming up with some answers, the thing is that like people are not going to trust this. The thing is, and they have a problem with trust with residents anyway.
Right.
So, but the thing, and also the thing is, like I said, I tell a joke when it comes to repairs in NYCHA. Since I'm a NYCHA resident, the thing is sometimes it takes a major act of Congress to get repairs. So the thing is that, I mean, it's crazy. You know, like they'll fix something and then they'll break something else when they fix that. I said it's and the thing is they really have to get their act together before they're even taken seriously with this.
Well, one of the things, if I may, one of the things that we did have the opportunity, and I definitely threw in there, was the fact that is a known fact. Any contractor comes to do anything in your apartment, they, back in the good days of NYCHA, they will send someone to check to make sure that that contractor did their work and that it was fully completed and well done before they even sign off on paying them for the contract, right? Especially per unit. Now you can have a painter come and they do such a sloppy job and then they leave, right? No one comes to check.
Yeah.
Sometimes they will say the work was done, the work was not done. So we're spending money, especially on doors, on intercoms, such as major capital funds that they're actually using. So like that, then even boilers, they start to break down, you know, and then after they gave them some money, right? Because they give them upfront money, then they don't do the job, they leave, they get another contractor to do the same thing. So you're constantly spending money on the same very contract that should have been already done a long time ago, or hold them accountable. That doesn't happen. So you're wasting money right there.
Yep.
You know, and that's where you have to get them. But in order for us to get a control of that, we need to get the controller to get involved to really hold their money and say, well, who's doing the punch list on these people? Who's checking behind them? That's not being done, because then that's our money that's being wasted. Meanwhile, these contractors, they got paid, they don't care.
Right.
And then they move on and get another contractor. That's a problem.
Yep. That's a great point. I appreciate that, John and Candy. So do I have any other comments? Those are all the hands. I want to make sure everyone were able to discuss. I appreciate all the input that we've had so far. Like I said, I've tried to note the major concerns, the questions, the things that have been said here by both committee members and the members of the public. So I will try to circulate something as soon as possible in order to just and ask for your input, see if I miss anything, questions. I'll compile a list, and that'll be what I'll use to, you know, once that's approved by everybody, then we'll go ahead and send that to NYCHA and invite them and give them those questions ahead of time so that we can expect them to be prepared to directly answer our questions, right? So I would like to give them as much notice as possible. So does anyone else have any other questions or comments that they would like to raise? All right. All right, Joanne Henry, and then Ivy came up and down. We'll go to you after Joanne Henry if you still want to talk. So go ahead, Joanne.
Please, but don't misunderstand. We're talking about NYCHA. For full disclosure, I live in a co-op, and I'm wondering, in East Harlem, whatever transacts in NYCHA transacts in co-ops and condominiums. We also have a couple of condominiums in East Harlem. So I'm wondering, why isn't there any discussion or solutions to some of the problems in our area, which are similar to NYCHA?
What specifically are you referring to? Because I know that depending on the type of housing it is, it's going to be very distinct conversations on who's responsible for what.
Well, let's use the fact that there's no, it's in my development right now, one of the buildings, there's no gas. That's one. Let's use the most simplest one about paint jobs, or just the issue of the complexity, the difference between a co-op, a condominium, and a NYCHA in terms of community. If we work together, we get things better done, but we seem to be separated and apart from the issues that are the same. Management may not be doing the right thing. Maybe we need to double up on figuring out how to resolve these solutions. And so what I'm saying is, all I hear basically in the community is what's going on with NYCHA. Now, I understand I'm in the middle of NYCHA, so don't misunderstand. I'm just saying that we belong together. And I think we ought to our issues are the same. I don't know if I'm coming across
No,
okay.
no, I appreciate your point. I just wanted to make sure I gave you the floor. I didn't want to cut you off.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we heard you, and I appreciate the point that you raised. I don't know if anybody has any.
Hi, Candy. Candy just said hello to me. Sorry.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. I know Marissa, Brian, oh yeah, you said you're having phone issues. That's no problem. I don't know if you want to, chat, text, or something, a question or concern you want to convey, then feel free to do that. Otherwise, again, you can do by email after the meeting if you want. Okay, so the last one will be Ivy, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item, and I'll tackle those as briefly as possible.
Yeah, I just had something really quick, which was about the interview I heard with Sean Donovan on the Brian Lehrer show. It was worth checking out, but I guess he used to be the HUD secretary under the Obama administration, and he was responsible for Villa Verde and the Bronx and a few other pretty successful developments. But I think the mayoral election is going to come in really faster than we think. So it's good if all of us kind of pay attention to what the different candidates have to say about housing. And I by no means think that he's the best candidate or know enough to even say that right now at all. So please don't get me wrong, but it was interesting to hear his experience and focus on housing.
I appreciate that. And I do think that that's good. Someone else, I don't know if it was one of the staff members, maybe Angel, or someone had emailed me talking about a mayoral forum recently, and thought it was pretty light on the housing substance, because there were definitely questions on housing. So I agree. I think this is a huge thing, and it's to the fore all the more during the pandemic and the economic crises that folks are really traversing right now. Okay, so thank you, everyone. So I'll quickly go on here. The next item is the update on the eviction moratorium in New York City Housing Court. So earlier I had talked about the federal moratorium had been extended for renters for a month. In New York State, on December 28th, 2020, of course, Governor Cuomo signed into law the COVID-19 Emergency Eviction and Foreclosure Prevention Act of 2020. And that stays all evictions and foreclosures, which means it presses pause. Nothing can happen at all as far as evictions and foreclosures for the next 60 days. That the official date, it'll run through February 24th. February 24th, 2021. Actually, I think it might be 26. Let me just make sure I have the date right, because it's you don't count the day that the legislation was passed, but either it's like February 24th or 25th. I will get you the exact date because you don't play with the date of the end of a moratorium, but it is right there in that ballpark. It's 60 days from December 20th, 2020. There's a complete stay. There's press pause. Nobody can be evicted. Marshals are prohibited from carrying out evictions. Landlords cannot execute what are called possessory judgments. That means they can't go to the court and request a warrant of eviction based off of their judgment of possession. Nothing can happen for the next 60 days. Housing court cases also they press pause. They're what's called stayed. There is a key exception, or some exceptions. One, HP proceedings, right? Those cases that tenants start against their landlords for repairs, for conditions, those will remain going forward virtually, right? Because they're considered emergency conditions that the tenant needs. Those will continue forward. So will illegal lockout cases where someone's alleging they've been illegally locked out without a court order. And finally, those cases that are nuisance holdover cases. That means a case where a tenant is alleged to be a nuisance, where they're engaging in conduct that's interfering with the safety or the health or enjoyment of the premises by other tenants. So, if the landlord's alleging you're that noisy neighbor, or engaging in illegal activities, you could be sued in what's called a nuisance holdover, right? They consider you a nuisance and you should be kicked out. Those are another big exception that are allowed to move forward, even during the pause, the 60-day stay. Now, what does that mean? So folks that have housing court cases, for example, they should call the county clerk if they'd like. A lot of judges are being proactive. I know that my colleagues who are attorneys are actively getting emails already rescheduling cases that are scheduled during the 60-day period, because nothing can happen, right? So there's also a key provision in the law that allows tenants to ask for default judgments to be vacated. And again, if you remember from the last committee meeting, if you were here, a default judgment means one where you lose a case because you failed to come to court or you failed to file an answer to paper suing you in housing court. There is a provision that allows folks to vacate those default judgments and put the case back on the court's calendar, right? Without having to do these motions. They can just make a request to the court orally or in writing. So a lot of folks have been trying email. All right, so 60-day pause. There is a potential extension. If you submit a declaration form that you have experienced financial hardship, or that you or your family will experience severe illness or worsening, subjects you to a worsened illness or severe illness or health concerns by being evicted, you can submit a declaration form to your landlord. Court has started to distribute it. You can ask the court for one. If you give it to the landlords under the law have to file these declarations with the court papers. So the court will see whether or not you filed the declaration as a tenant. Is it going to be part of a case? That will extend your moratorium on residential evictions until May 1st, 2021. Okay, so May 1st, 2021 is you can get that extension, but only if you submit this hardship declaration of financial hardship or health hardship during the pandemic, or would have that health affected if you were evicted. So Stephanie, you have a question about that?
Yeah, so would you put that in before, like if you already know that your landlord is probably gonna start the eviction process because you're behind on your rent and you know you're already the 3 months or whatever behind, and you're not gonna make it in time to pay for it before, court is even, before they give you a court date, would you put in that declaration before, or would you have to wait till your case is actually in court?
You do not have to wait until that case is in court. You can submit declarations ahead of time because I believe, if I remember correctly, that if a landlord gets that declaration form, then if the landlord even wants to file a new case, a non-payment case against the tenant, then the landlord under the law is required to file that declaration form with them. And if the landlord does that, then that case nothing can happen during the 60-day stay period. Even till May 1st, sorry, if they have the declaration form, right? So the court will get the filing, but then if that declaration form is there, the case can't be calendared. It can't move forward at all. So yeah, you can submit these forms and would actually, I advise clients to do that, or tenants generally, if I'm not representing them and I'm on some sort of hotline or giving information or presentation. I do suggest that because it's also the CDC moratorium. For example, again, the New York State one is stronger now, excuse me, than the CDC one. But the CDC moratorium, for example, allowed people to file this declaration. They download it online, even if you hadn't been sued yet, because that prevented the landlord from even moving forward with those cases. No problem. Okay, so that's basically it. Like I said, I gave you the limited world, the universe of cases that will move forward in housing court case. This ban doesn't only apply to, or this stay to housing court case. It's also like Supreme Court cases for ejectment, right? It's a different type of case for basically for eviction, but for one reason or another, you're not filing it in housing court. So There's various legal reasons why you might do that, but it's not as common. But this, covers that as well. The new law, the December 28th law, which is once again the straightforwardly named COVID-19 Emergency Eviction and Foreclosure Prevention Act of 2020. All right. And again, its express purpose of this law is, quote, to avoid as many evictions and foreclosures as possible for people experiencing a financial hardship during the COVID-19 pandemic or who cannot move due to an increased risk of severe illness or death from COVID-19, end quote. So that is your purpose, okay? Any questions? You can, again, feel free to contact me afterward. I try to distill this information in the minutes as well as much as possible, or as clearly as possible as well. All right, so with that, if there's no other questions or comments on that agenda item, I will move right on to the goals for 2021 and accomplishments in 2020. So let's see. So, I had briefly mentioned, I know it was on the fly, I talked about this with Marlene, but I also kind of confirmed some of the things I said with Xavier. I would like us to sort of just take a moment now. This is the, we like to do this in the community board, to take a moment to reflect on our work when we get to a new calendar year, at the end of the year. We can see, what we've accomplished and what we want to accomplish in 2021. So I will just start that. I know I was, happy that the committee, I was proud of the committee for really being able to tackle, especially when the pandemic first started and we were all, dealing with a lot of even more uncertainty than we are now, right? It continues, but it was those really, initial period when there's uncertainty was abounding. Nobody knew what was going to happen or how long we'd be in this. But, folks really knew that it was going to take drastic solutions. That was the one thing that was very clear, in my opinion, to the folks on this committee and in the community board. So I was really proud of us for calling for, universal rent cancellation and mortgage forgiveness for, on the mortgage side for qualifying small landlords and homeowners. And then we also had correspondingly as well for called for forgiveness on associated costs, living costs, right? Like taxes and utility payments. So we were really thinking about the constituency, the tenants that, that are overwhelmingly below 30, a plurality live below 30% of AMI in our district. And, so a lot of us, our folks have neighbors that are experiencing all the more acutely the pandemic, also being primarily a community of color that is ravaged, COVID-19 has ravaged communities of color at a far disproportionate rate, both economically and health-wise, right, physically, and we've borne the brunt of that. So, I was proud of the stance that we took of going through and looking at there being drastic action, and one that seems radical in my opinion, but one that I thought that the community board and members just thought made common sense and just shifted equities and balanced equities in a much better way, and in a way that is that bucks the trend of history, right? We have an economic system that does favor certain privileged folks and types of people. So we know how the system is, and money and politics and all of this sort of thing. So it's just rethinking and just really putting the onus where it should be. I was proud of us for that, as well as maintaining our ongoing meetings and educating. I know a lot of you did that as well outside of our committee meetings, came to me with questions. I was proud of the way that we were able to just sort of have little know your rights workshops in some sense, right? That's something that I do as part of my job sometimes, going out to the community, doing know your rights presentations and workshops. And sometimes our committee meetings felt like that with the discussions that we had and the presentations that we had. So, and it was during a time, again, that the law was ever changing and evolving because of constant executive orders that were expiring and being renewed. And we're shifting in the language and the failure to act in Albany and in Washington and all these sorts of things, right? And then when they did act, there was different regimes and requirements then. So there was sort of this constant education and interaction that occurred that I found gratifying as well. I don't know if anybody else wants to talk and reflect a little bit on some accomplishments of 2020 or things that we engaged in. And again, I'm also proud of folks, like I said, who did extended, and you're in the community and you're answering questions and really connecting with neighbors trying to bring answers during a time where there's so much instability. So yeah, I'll open up the floor before we talk about some goals. Go ahead, Xavier.
So many hands up at once. So I want to say thank you to everyone for getting us through the year. It has been no it's been a challenge, and I want to say that our committee has stood up and participated extensively, and I want to say thank you to everyone. We've been met with very extenuating circumstances, and I appreciate that. The other thing I want to say is that I'd like to see, I want to say thank you to everyone who would just reach out and make a suggestion, a recommendation, and using this forum to make move our chess pieces down the board. I think that's really what it is that we've had to pivot, and we've had members who were not as technically savvy get involved, not just on this committee, but others. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that many of us have had to pivot. And we've done so successfully, as you noted, the 2 resolutions. We've also had more engagement across the board and people tuning in and logging in. I'd have to say that human services and housing have, and then not far from that, parks have had some pretty high participation, and that speaks to the work we do. So I think that's something to be noted as an accomplishment, and I look forward to that growing. And I think it's pretty cool that we have John Green as our vice chair now, and actually having a member of our NYCHA community participating. That makes me very happy. So, and but on that, I'd like to pass it back to you about goals for this year.
Yeah, appreciate it. So I was reflecting a little bit on some things. I chatted a little bit with Xavier, and I talked to some others of you as well. I would love to hear from you all if there's any specific goals you would like to see. I've talked about some that, they talk a little bit about, obviously, like what is the most effective way to set goals, right? Like setting concrete steps, so I will be guilty of sort of 2 intangible goals. Unfortunately, maybe there's a way that I can think of and reflect on it that will make it much more concrete. As far as concrete, like I think that maybe we can do, 2 community events, right? We have one already planned for March 31st. For those who don't know, we're collaborating with HPD, right? So we're going to be reaching out, trying to put together a panel regarding tenants' rights during the pandemic. So that's something that, will, if it requires, sometimes different people can volunteer or step up, or could be enlisted. So, you might be hearing from me regarding with that respect, but that's underway. And so I think maybe like having 2 is a concrete goal. But then my intangibles that I'll be guilty of here is that are pretty interrelated, but one is to strengthen networks and connections across community boards, particularly the uptown ones, that reflect more closely a lot of the struggles and challenges that East Harlem faces, and changes as well, the dynamics that have been shifting, particularly our uptown community boards in Manhattan. And as well, and relatedly, increasing the cross-committee collaboration, which, I know is a thing that a lot of folks have been talking about a lot more, but is one that I know I've not been guilty of thinking outside of, thinking very much about how we can engage in that. But I know that there are opportunities, and we do also have chairs. Like I know Nai is very engaged and often at various committees and spreading the word and looking for ways we can connect, and others are as well. So I'd like to see that as well. So I don't know if anyone else would like to talk about something that they view as maybe as something that could be a worthwhile goal, or that even if it's not like a concrete goal, again, if it's a little more intangible, something you might like to see us move toward or accomplish. And if you know folks across the different community boards, or involved in housing issues in these other community districts, of course, feel free to connect me with them as well, or to talk to me and, you talk to your connection, whatever it is that we can talk about. I don't know what it is. There's a lot of different things that are really open. There's a lot of organizing things. There's a lot of policy issues. This is still, the pandemic still goes on, right? Even we're still far from it, even with the first vaccines coming out now. There's a lot of challenges and logistical problems that will keep us, far from any sort of normalcy for a long time. So.
So Jeremiah, I would just ask for, we've had a lot of our members who've had to be onboarded during this pandemic. It's all been virtual, and we've been speaking to several. Some have been overwhelmed because they're caregivers or have experienced loss, or they just want to participate. And the one thing I would recommend to any of our membership, any of the public, just choose one thing that you can recommend to your committee, to this committee, an idea, bring it to Jeremiah and to John, present it, and say, hey, I have this idea, or I know this CBO I've worked with, and I think there is a connection here. And Stephanie, I'm going to call you out. So turn on your camera. And there you are. I got it. It's simple, and I'm just giving a little cred, but message me about getting connected with Crafts, right? And Violetta, and she needed to get connected, and they were doing work with homeless youth, and we're having difficulty bridging that gap. And just by making that one outreach, I was able to make 15 minutes worth of calls, conversations, couple quick pitches, and people got connected and work got done. And so I think the thing is, and this is not so much, this is about us doing the work together. So if you have something that pops up, take the initiative, reach out, you can make a difference. And that was an example. And I just would implore to not just this committee, if you have an idea, if you think it has potential, pitch it. It may not work this quarter, the next quarter, but we can find a tenable pathway to its fruition. And I think that's where I would implore all membership. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, just one idea, one thing that you can make happen. And that is what I recommend. And just as quick as a simple text, an email, can you do something? We can all connect that way. If you're at a meeting, it's like, hey, I'm going home, I'm sitting down, I can't sleep, it's 2 a.m. Email, what can you do? What can we connect? And that is building our village. So that's what I would say is for goals we set, is building on that interconnectivity and having, if every member, when we're full functioning 50 members, can just pick one thing and they say, I'm going to run, I'll run point, and then I'll pass the baton to our committee leadership and then run up the flight. Like we can accomplish so much. And just one thing, one phone call, one email. So that's what I would ask of our committee, all of our committees. And I think we do a pretty good job with that here. And I just want to call that out because, it was over the holidays, and I like to give people credit where credit's due. So anyway, I'm going to be quiet now.
Thanks, Xavier. Appreciate that. And yeah, I do appreciate the folks. Like, I know a lot of you are doing stuff too that I don't even know about. I can even tell just the way, and sometimes it comes up, and just the way you advocate for folks or asking questions because you're truly exploring based off things that you've heard, right? Challenges neighbors are facing, or issues, or things that are galvanizing folks. So, that's not lost on me. And I appreciate that, even if I don't know the things you're doing. You all are on Housing Committee for a reason. All right, so I don't want to belabor. I know you all had, I really appreciate the input that we got earlier when we were talking about questions for the blueprint for change for NYCHA. So I won't keep you here too late. We're you'll be happy to know that this next agenda point here of Mayor's preliminary budget for fiscal year 2022, what the information I have is that we don't have that preliminary budget yet. However, you all, my beautiful committee members, should be on the lookout for those responses, and we should be prepared to give input this month on them. So, the responses will be forthcoming imminently. And so once those are circulated, I appreciate you all having read the materials I circulated with the Blueprint for Change. Similarly, I'll circulate whatever the mayor's office shares with us that we need input on. Hopefully we can get that in the interim as well. But it's also sort of a standing, in a way, conversation topic, because you're doing this budget review process, and the budget review process is supposed to be reflective of the needs and things that we see in our community and hear. So it's a constant reevaluation and reassessment. So this is never really done. So again, I just encourage you to just, always, if you have any ideas as far as with budget requests or when it comes to that, like concrete things that money can be added to make differences in East Harlem, feel free to bring those up. Anything it is, anything, whatever it might be. All right, so any old business from the committee or public?
Excuse me, Jeremiah?
Yes, absolutely, John.
Well, it's not new business actually with the budget needs and things like I'm going to basically do the liaisons thing that Jason asked us to do. The thing is that I'm just giving you guys a heads up with budgets being not what they were a couple of years ago. The thing is that the committee may have to prioritize what we want funded most, because the thing is that money is going to be short in all parts of government for the next few years. So the thing is this: if there's one community need that we really want funded, we may have to prioritize it and really push for it.
Thanks, John. Any other comments on that or any old business from anyone? All right, seeing none, new business from the committee or public? Okay, so that's it. So that's the first committee meeting here, folks, of January or of 2021. And so I'm really happy to see you all. We got a quorum really quickly. So that started off with a bang, despite I was the one who held it up with my mic stuff. Yeah, again, it's great to see everyone. I really do hope that folks are staying safe, you and your loved ones as well, during the beginning of this new year. Happy New Year to all of you. I really appreciate the members of the public who came and really participated. I love that when that happens. That's really great, because the point is not to be in our bubble talking amongst ourselves. So I appreciate you all from the public who come, and particularly you who raise your hands and you speak or you type in the chat. So thanks so much for all that you do and for being involved, because this is just extra, I know. Thanks a lot, everybody. If there's nothing else, then I will entertain a motion for an adjournment. Motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Motion, Stephanie Arroyo.
Second.
Second, Candy. All right, Vives Vasquez. All right, so all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, any abstentions? All right, the meeting's adjourned, 8:47 p.m. Happy New Year, everybody. We'll talk soon.
New Year.
You too. Take care.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Good night, guys.
Good night.